He was fun to have and fun to get rid of.
Yeah. It did. I was trying to take a bone out of this.
All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks for showing up on this beautiful day. I'd like to introduce our guest speaker today, who works for an organic farm in Richmond, correct? Or near Richmond? Okay. Her part is gardening about 3 acres, you said, for vegetable gardening to support 100 people in that community. She's also a well-renowned author as well. So without much ado, this is Pam Dawling.
So I hope everybody got a handout. There's also 3 bookmarks around there. And this is what we're going to talk about today, succession planting to enable us to have continuous vegetable harvests without gaps, without piles of zucchini. And hopefully. I will be selling copies of my book and signing them if you want them signed afterwards out there. We've got plenty of time for questions, so you can ask questions as we go along, or we can chat at the end, whichever works best for you. What else to say? Oh yeah, the book, yeah. It's out there. If you didn't see it, this is the book. Sustainable Market Farming. It's a big book. So there's that. I have a website, sustainablemarketfarming.com. And I do a blog post there once a week, usually Monday, Tuesday, might be switching to Wednesdays. It also goes straight to Facebook, so if you prefer Facebook, you can get it there. And there's my email address. If you have questions, you could email me. I'm not the world's fastest email responder, but I will reply at some point. I also write for Growing for Market magazine, which comes out 10 times a year. It's written by growers, for growers, and it's mostly intended for people that are growing for sale, but if you are growing on that sort of, on a few acres, on that sort of scale anyway, it would be of interest whether you're selling or not. You can subscribe online. I've got 1 or 2 paper subscription forms if anybody needs one of those. What else do I have? Oh, I sometimes write blog posts for Mother Earth News in their organic gardening section. And this, I just updated this slideshow. An earlier version of it is on slideshare.net. Some of my other slideshows are also on that. So you go to www.slideshare.net and you put my name, Pam Dawling, in the search box, and it will show you different presentations that I've done, and you can look at them there. So I'm going to I'm not sure quite how to do it, whether I'm going to edit the one that's already up there or post this new version up there. I don't know. And Gillian is doing a recording, so we hope that goes well. Okay, I think I've told you all the bits I need to tell you about. Yeah. Oh, I'm going to take my name off before I put it on slideshow. My email address. I don't want everybody to have that. So what I'm going to talk about this morning is, first of all, introductions, a bit about my farm, and a bit about what succession planting is. And then we're going to talk about finding space for popping in these smaller plantings of short duration crops, several approaches to scheduling succession crops, and then the method that I'm advocating, which is making a graph for each crop, and I'm going to go through that step by step so it's not too terrifying or anything. And then talk about the extra benefits of succession crop planning, and then other factors in crop scheduling that, like not to get too far down the road of succession crop planning without thinking about other aspects. Then we're going to talk about winter hoop house succession crops and year-round lettuce. And at the end, there's a resources section, which I won't read aloud to you. So you might want to flip, if you haven't already, flip through the handout and see what's in it, so that you don't spend time trying to scribble down things that are already printed in there.
Would you say pretty much everything that we need to know is in here?
No, everything you need to know is in my book.
There we go.
I couldn't resist.
Or will be in the next book when it comes.
Oh, yeah, the next book, right. Okay, so the purpose of this planning process is to avoid gluts and shortages, and to make best use of your land and your time, so that we don't like give space over to more cucumber plants than we need, or spend too much time cultivating around the edamame, that's way too much. So we're going to talk first of all about the summer succession crops, the beans, squash, cucumbers, edamame, sweet corn, and then about the winter hoop house greens, and then about the year-round lettuce. So I live and farm at Twin Oaks Community. We're between Richmond and Charlottesville. We're in Louisa County, and I'm part of Twin Oaks Community, which is an intentional community of 100 people. There are some little flyers about Twin Oaks out there on the table as well. We do Saturday afternoon tours. They're not garden tours. They're tours of the community. If you're interested in that aspect, we work together. We share our income. We share our expenses. We share our work. And my biggest piece of my work is manager of the vegetable gardens. And you can see over the top of that little rusty roofed woodshed there, you can see some of our raised bed area. We have 3.5 acres of vegetable gardens, and it's vegetables and some berries. And we try to provide for our community for year-round use. So we're doing a lot of season extension, we're growing winter crops in the hoop house, we grow crops for storage, like root crops and so on. We also have a big food processing team who freeze and can and dry stuff, so that we hope, our goal is not to have to buy any vegetables. So I don't actually sell, well, very occasionally, if we end up with a surplus or something, we do sell something, but mostly we're growing for ourselves. So I'm not so good on the marketing side, I'm better on the production side. Although to some extent, like I was just talking with Norm about stems of Senposai, we do have to market in the sense of educating our cooks and how we present things. So we do that kind of stuff. Our vegetable gardens are a mixed kind of system. We have 60 permanent raised beds. They're mostly 90 feet long, they're 4 feet wide. And we don't take the tractor in there. We do that with a walk behind rototiller and lots of people. And then we've got 10 areas of row crops that are between 9,000 and 10,600 square feet each. And we've got an aerial view coming up here.
Do you till those every year?
Your row crop areas or the beds?
Do you till them every year?
We do one no-till bit, and that's what we manage. Otherwise, we're tilling them up every year. So this is
How is your tilling method?
for the row crop areas. We use tractor and discs for the primary.
You actually disc and then grade it down, not a rototiller type?
We haven't got a tractor mounted rototiller. We've got just the walk behind rototiller, the ECS. Yeah. So they use the discs on angled, and they go through once, and then go through spreading compost, and then go through again with the discs, and then.
Do you ever bottom plow?
No.
You do not. Okay.
No, we don't. We do have one. We don't use it. So this view north is to the top of the picture. If you're coming down the Twin Oaks driveway there, you see that stripy green bit on what would be your left if you're driving in. That's our west garden. And then you get to the small stripy area, which is our 60 permanent raised beds. And then there's that red balloon with an A in it. That's our greenhouse. But Google thinks we all live there. Never mind. And then round to the parking lot, and then there's a cluster of buildings where some of us do live. And then north of that, there's another bright green area. It's a very bright green. It's not so bright green anyway. And that's our central garden. And north of that long white building, that's our hoop house. We just have the one. And then we've got pastures and an apple orchard and stuff there. And then further over to the right, the other green stripy bit is our east garden. So that's kind of how our gardens are. They're not all in one area, so fencing would be rather difficult. So we do have trouble with deer, but that's what we manage with. So some of the crops we're going to talk about today are the summer succession crops: beans, edamame if you grow those, the edible soybeans, cucumbers, melons. Like cantaloupes, muskmelons, summer squash and zucchini and sweet corn. If you do several sowings of those, you can keep up the supply during the frost-free period or and a little bit into the fall frost time. And then there's a whole group of crops that in our kind of climates we can grow in the spring and then again in the fall. Lettuce, which we can grow year round, and then in the winter, hoop house, not just lettuce but also spinach, turnips, radishes, scallions, tatsoi and some other Asian greens I'm going to talk more about later. So first we'll just talk about the spring and fall carrots. This is to say how we do successions in the spring with carrots. We start sowing our carrots mid to late February usually, or middle of March if we get a wet spring. And then we sow a new bed every month. Late February, then March, April, May. And then if we think we need more carrots, we will sow in June and July. They're not the best carrots because it gets too hot to get good flavored carrots, but they will still grow. And then we make one huge fall planting in early August. And so the point of this is to say, in the fall, we're not doing succession planting anymore. We're just doing one massive planting, and our goal there is to grow storage carrots. So we do a big planting. It's like 12 of our regular beds, and then we harvest them all in November, store them for the winter. And then the sidebar, if you're sowing in fall, the sowing date is really crucial. A delay of 2 days in the sowing date can make a difference of as much as 2 or 3 weeks in the harvest date because everything is slowing down. So if you plan to sow in the fall and you've figured out when you need to sow, you want to try really hard to do it on that date and not put it off for a few days because well, if it's carrots, they'll just...
Can I ask a question? So you're planting in a very huge area, so you're mid to late February, that's one row or rows or whatever, and then when you're planting 4 weeks later, where are you planting?
Right, so most of our carrots we do in that permanent raised bed area. So we would grow one 90-foot by 4-foot bed each time. We would do 5 rows in that 4-foot wide bed. And then in another month later we would sow another one. And that's like for 100 people, that's about a good amount.
So one bed is empty, and then 4 weeks later it has carrots in it.
It might be empty. It might have a winter cover crop if we're talking about spring planting, or if we're talking about the summer planting, we might have done a round of lettuce first, or something quick spring crop first. Yeah, those raised beds we do use very intensively, and we plant them. Some of them 3 times in the year, different crops, and then we really try hard to have cover crops over the winter if it's not too late. By the time that last crop is finished. Yeah, we keep those well used.
I have a question about the harvesting in November and then storing them.
Yeah.
We may not be touching on storing much in this discussion, but it's kind of a quick storage method.
Well, what we do with carrots is we have a big walk-in cooler, and so we wash the carrots and drain them and sort them. So we sort out the ones that won't store, and then we put them in big perforated plastic sacks. We store them in the walk-in cooler.
Okay.
You can, of course, do storage in root cellars and...
Humidity up or down in your walk-in cooler?
It's up, I would say, rather than down. Yeah. I have got a slideshow about cold hardy winter vegetables, so you could look at that one on slideshow.net. It has a little bit about storage, and I have some about storage in my book as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so the first bit then in planning the succession crops is finding the space. So we measured our gardens. You can do this without going out with a tape measure these days, using the Google map things, and you can measure it on the map without going out there. We did it the old-fashioned way with a tape measure, and then we drew it out on a piece of paper. This is our east garden. What we did was we figured out what our major crops were, first of all, the ones that take the most space, and we figured out what area we needed for the biggest of those, and that decided our plot area. So now we have these plots there. They're roughly the same size but slightly different. And first of all, we put in the major crops. I think this is the next slide. So it gets very crowded. So we put in the major crops. They don't all need the same sort of space. And when I say major crops, I'm thinking about spring potato, white potatoes, June planted white potatoes, sweet potatoes. Well, actually the sweet corn, we do a lot of sweet corn, and it takes up major space, although not for long, not for very long really. Watermelons are another big one. Winter squash, when we grow those, we don't always grow those. Fall broccoli and cabbage, spring broccoli and cabbage, garlic, they all take fairly large spaces. So we plan those first before we move on to fitting in the crops that take a smaller space. Because each time we plant beans or cucumbers or squash, we're talking about a 100-foot row only. We're not talking about 9,000 square feet at once. So fit the big stuff in, look what space is left, and then fit the small stuff in. This is our crop rotation for our major crops. And this is in the book. It's a 10-year rotation, but it's not 10 years between one sweet corn and the next sweet corn, or one potatoes and the next potatoes or tomatoes. So when we made it originally, we made a circle of card, and we made a small circle of card. That one in the middle that says A, B, C, D, E, those are the plot names. And that's fastened to the big piece of cardboard with one of those brass paper clips with the legs. And each year you just turn it around one notch clockwise, and it shows you what's in that plot the next year. And this really helped us get a grip on the crop rotation. Because usually when you read descriptions of crop rotations, they talk about like a linear kind of, this, then this, then this. But of course, really, it's going to go around and come back again. And we've got the same old piece of card, and we've gone around at least twice. I scanned it and I sent it in when I was writing my book, and the publisher said, so you'll be wanting us to redraw this diagram. And I said, okay, because it was really scrappy and I hadn't sort of noticed, So this is the tidy version. So this is for sorting out the major crops first. And once you've got a grip on that, then you can fit in the smaller, the summer succession crops. So we look for what extra space there is in any of our plots after we've put the big things in. And we make ourselves a chart like this. And on the left, the columns on the left represent the spaces left in our plots once we've kind of decided to put the major crop in there. And we write those down in the order that they'll be available, because you don't want to have a plan where you need to put 100 foot of beans in early May in a big plot which wouldn't otherwise get, in our case, disked up until June. That would be bad planning. So you want to have the little crops fit time-wise with when the big plot is going to get cultivated for the main thing. So we put those in the order they'll be available, and we write down where they are and also the size and shape that they are, because for some things you need a 6 foot or 7 foot or 8 foot width. For raw beans you don't need such a wide area. So we write the dimensions in, and then when it's going to be ready. And then over on the right side are the columns with all the crops that we hope to squeeze in somewhere, and they're all in date order by sowing date. And then we take a pencil and we make arrows to try and find a home for everything. And once we have a set that works for everything, then we ink in the arrows. And you'll see that I don't know if you can, it's a bit small, but yeah, not so far away. At the beginning and the end of the season, we often use some of our raised beds for these crops. At the beginning of the year, it works well to use the raised beds because they're more accessible earlier in the spring. We're going to cultivate them using our walk-behind rototiller, and we can do that sooner than we could bring a big tractor onto the land, because the tractor causes too much compression, compaction, And also our raised beds drain quicker because they're raised, so they dry out quicker, so we can get to them sooner and prepare those. And so our first beans, our first cucumbers, our first squash are all in our raised bed area. And then at the other end of the year, we tend to put our last, especially the squash, cucumbers and beans, we tend to put those in the raised beds as well. And this helps us because in two ways. One is that we want to get our big main plots for row crop plots into nice cover crops in good time so that we get a nice stand of cover crops to replenish the soil. And so if we just have, we don't have the last lingering bean row out there somewhere, but in our raised bed area, then we can cover crop the bigger areas. And secondly, oh yeah, go on.
So
Go ahead.
you don't cover crop the raised beds?
Yeah, we do, but not as a whole unit. Like each bed, when it becomes available, when we finish the food crops for the year, we put in a cover crop. So it's okay for us if some of our beds they're still in food crops going into the colder weather. Some of them won't get a cover crop. But that works fine because it's a relatively small amount of the whole, yeah.
So can I still understand, Chris, where are you going to, this is kind of varies year to year, you have the nice
Yeah.
chart, but where are you going to put these succession crops? That varies by each year, is that right?
Yes, like there's some things that don't usually take up the whole of one of those main row crop plots. So we usually have a bit of space, and so we can put in, depending, our garden areas are different sizes.
Right.
The row might be 265 feet, might be 180 feet. We can put in maybe like, if we've got like a 6-foot strip in the 180-foot long garden, we can put in 90 feet of squash and 90 feet of cucumbers, kind of alongside something else.
And when you're doing this, I kind of do what you just said, but a problem I always come across is like, what did I have in there in the last several years?
Yeah.
So it's like, kind of like, oh, I want to put my squash here, but I can't, I had, pumpkins there last year.
Yeah.
Or something like that. And
Yeah.
Does that figure into your math here? Or you think,
Do it a
oh, we're
bit.
going to plant there next year, you can't, if I stick my beans in this little corner, well, then I can't put my peas there next year.
Right, it is a bit more ad hoc and it's a bit more fudged, to be honest. We do keep all our maps of what we have grown in previous years so we can see what was there the last year. And we can also, we can put our watermelons to the east of the patch or to the west of the patch and have the gap be a different side from where it was last year. And we do that kind of thing. But we do it this sort of ad hoc way because we can fit more in that way. And we reckon because we're growing so many different vegetables, it's probably going to be okay. We can take a few risks. And we know which are our worst pest problems, for instance.
Yeah, right.
So we know what to be more careful of. We have to be really careful with brassicas. But the bean and pea one hasn't been a problem for us, so we don't think about that one very carefully. So, in fact, we often put soybeans in as a summer cover crop. So far, no problems, but we should watch out for it. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. So when we've got this figured out, and then we make this thing we call the Veg Finder. Because we've got beans all over the place. We prefer to have the beans, like for instance, be in different parts of the garden, rather than have an area where we've got the first beans, the second beans, the third beans, the fourth beans, and so on, because we hope that the diseases and the pests will be less likely to travel from one planting to the next if we've got them kind of scattered about. But it makes it hard to find them, especially when different people are working in the garden on different days. So we make this chart, and we have this hanging up in the shed. And so an expanded view of one of those squares. And so this is the third planting of squash, and it's going to be in the west garden in plot J, and we aim to plant it 623, and it's going to be 120 feet row. And then we've got spaces where we just record when we plant it, when we start harvesting it, and when it's finished. And so somebody else on another day coming to look at that chart can see, oh right, we finished we finished with the third squash and we're now on to the fourth squash. It helps us to find things, and that information is going to be really useful later in the winter when we're doing our planning for the next year. We've got that information about how long from planting to the start of the harvest and how long from the start of the harvest to the end of the harvest for each of those plantings, and that turns into really useful, solid information that's really local.
How much does it play into the first planting on what may come in there on the second planting? On what you would do if you're going to plant the squash and if you're going to follow it up with a fall planting when the squash is spent, how much does that play into where you put it? And what would follow it where it is?
Right.
A lot, or just you look at it when said and done?
We
have these spaces.
Yeah, with our raised beds we do 2 stages of the planting. In the winter we plan the crops up to August the 4th. I don't know why the 4th particularly, but that's what we do. And then in June, middle of June, we plan for the second half of the year. And so sometimes we'll switch, like if we plan to put the last beans in a particular bed, if we've got a good reason to move it, when we do the second half of the year planning in June, then we've still got time to switch that around. Like, you know, some crops have done well and some have been disasters, then we've got new information to play with. So for us it works better to do the planning in those 2 stages. And that's because we're really trying to pack lots in.
And when you're doing your cover crop, do you sit down there and do you have just a general cover crop that you use a lot of, or do you sit down there and say this bed is going to need more nitrogen, so I'm doing a clover cover crop as opposed to a rye cover crop?
Well, let's see, can we go, how far back we have to go? About that. Out, it's sort of like a bit like a pie. Out on the crust part of the pie are the winter cover crops that are going to follow those.
So you're thinking about what you're going to put in that bed the following spring, as opposed to what cover crop actually covers that area.
For the row crop areas, we have it planned out, because we have this big rotation. For the raised bed area, it's a lot more ad hoc. If our food crop finishes in time, we sow oats because it's nice and easy to incorporate in the spring. And if we're not in time for the oats, we do wheat. And if we have to, we do rye, but it's harder to get rye.
Do you ever do something like a crimson or a vetch or something that has a nitrogen fixing ability?
In the row crop areas we do.
In a row crop, okay.
But not in the raised beds. In the raised beds we just do the soybeans in the summer if we get a gap.
Which is a fixing, that's a...
Yeah, it does, yeah. So with the raised bed areas we really rely on slapping on a lot of compost which has its phosphorus risks, but that's what we do, and we do grow peas and beans in there as food crops, some of them. I don't know that we've ever done like clovers or vetches in the raised beds because they're relatively slow. No, it's just because they take time. And whatever it is we grow in those raised beds, we've got to be able to incorporate with our walk behind tiller. Well, we can mow it first, but then we've got to be able to incorporate it with the tiller. So we don't want anything too gigantic. We had a bit of a challenge with some millet one time. And sorghum Sudan is really scary.
Very good.
Okay, we do that one. So moving on from finding the space to scheduling, finding the times when to sow. There's lots of crops that can be planted several times during the summer part of the season. The one part is don't stop too soon, even though you're tired. There's many things that you can still be sowing in June, July, early August. You probably noticed that many crops mature quicker in warmer weather. So if you want to get harvests, for instance, of squash, if you want to get harvests starting every 3 or 4 weeks, whatever you want, you have to shrink the interval between the planting dates as the season warms up. Otherwise, you get some gaps and you get some pile-ups. So if you keep your own records, like on that Veg Finder that I showed you, you can use that information the next winter when you do your planning. I'm assuming you do your planning in the winter. I recommend it. Also, if you've got friends who are growing the same kind of crops very nearby, you could pool your information. You know, they might have different sowing dates from you. You could pool your information and both gain from that. This could be a nice little local group activity for the winter. Is coming up with planting systems schedules that work well for everybody. I think that I was doing some teaching for the local food hub in Charlottesville, and they were trying to figure out how to get a better supply of winter crops, and they were hoping to have different farmers commit to making different plantings on different dates so they would have a supply. So there's several approaches to succession crop scheduling, and you can sort of take this at whatever level or type suits you. And I'm going to look at each one of these in a bit more detail after the overview here. There's the rough plan version, plant this every 2 weeks kind of thing. For some crops, there's a no paperwork method, which involves looking at the previous planting and seeing what stage it's got to help you determine when to sow the next one. For some crops, you can sow several varieties on the same day. You can choose varieties with different days to maturity. You can plan a sequence of sowing dates using graphs. I'm going to show you all about that. And you can use accumulated growing degree days, which I don't know much about, but I'll tell you what I do know where to find out more. So on the rough plan, this is a good starting point, or if you don't want to keep paperwork, it's growing just for you, your family or whatever, or you've just moved to this region from Minnesota or somewhere. Every 2 weeks you sow beans and corn. Every 3 weeks you sow squash, cucumbers, edamame. Every 4 weeks sow some carrots and some cantaloupes, muskmelons, if it's not frosty, of course. So that's kind of an easy place to start if you don't have any records from previous years or you want something simple. But this will result in some gaps of some things and some piles of cucumbers.
Bush beans that you're planting?
Bush beans, yeah.
I think I usually use pole beans. 2 weeks seems frequent.
That's true.
Okay.
Yeah. We don't grow pole beans. They take longer to reach maturity, but they do stay good for longer. We don't grow them. Nowadays it's because we don't like putting up trellises. Earlier on it was because we had the Mexican bean beetles, which I'll talk more about.
Are your bush beans a variety? It's a one pick and cultivate, or you get to work the line? Yeah, we pick 3 times a week. Yeah. Okay.
And we do Provider and Bush Blue Lake, fairly old time varieties.
Now, does irrigating speed a crop up or slow a crop down? When you rely on heat and weather and everything else too?
We use irrigation a lot.
So that you can hold your rotation, as opposed to if it doesn't rain, that slows one down and speeds one up when it comes, and they all come in at the same time.
Yeah, where we are, sometimes it's way too dry and hot for too long, and we really need to water. Yeah, we do some drip irrigation, and we do some overhead sprinkler irrigation.
Do you have permanent lines that are easily gotten in, or you start pulling lines once you plant your beds?
Yeah, we plant first.
Plant first and pull everything.
Yeah.
Is it a pressurized irrigation, or do you have a hillside that you can pump water on and let the...
It's pressurized, it's from a well.
Okay.
Yeah, we wouldn't be able to grow much without irrigation, I think. Okay, the no paperwork methods. So with sweet corn, once the previous planting is 1 inch or 2 high, it's time to sow another one. These methods work because as the weather gets warmer, the crops germinate and grow quicker, and so they'll quicker reach this sort of alert stage, which tells you it's time to plant some more. So that's how it works. It's actually accumulated degree days without the measurement. Warmer weather makes things grow faster, so you have to plant another planting sooner if you want to keep up the supply. So sweet corn, 1 to 2 inches tall. With lettuce, assuming you're sowing it outdoors, this doesn't work if you're sowing it in a greenhouse, If you're sowing lettuce outdoors, as soon as one planting germinates, it's time to sow some more. With beans, they come up out the ground in that sort of hook loop thing, and then they straighten up and the leaves waving in the air. When they straighten up is the time to sow some more. So you can use those if you don't like the paperwork. It's also an interesting thing to do, just to pay attention and look and see how things are coming on, and how it does speed up when it's hotter. The next method is using varieties with different numbers of days to maturity, sown all on the same day. We do this with broccoli, with lettuce, and with sweet corn. With broccoli, we're only doing it in the spring and the fall. We're not trying to grow it in the summer. But we do 4 or sometimes 5. Or one awful year, we did about 7 or 8. We were helping North Carolina State University with a broccoli trial. We had to keep records of everything. So different varieties that mature at different rates, it gives you a longer season by, it might only be by 10 days or something. But if you really like broccoli, it's well worth having. When we do lettuce, we do 4 different varieties each time, and we try to choose ones that have different number of days to maturity, as well as choosing some green ones, some red ones, some romaine, some frilly ones, different sorts. With sweet corn, which is in the picture here, we generally sow 3 different kinds, and reading from the right to the left, on the right you can see cold wet spring, and we ended up transplanting both lots on the same day. And the second ones did a lot better than the first ones. So keeping old, chilled, stunted transplants is just not worth doing. Particularly true of cucumbers and peppers. They really don't like to be hanging around too long, and they don't like to be too cold. So don't start those too early. But it's always interesting to see just how early you can start things. These are cucumbers in our hoop house. We do this bush variety, Space Master, and there's 2 little plants together there. And then at the other end of the season, if you're looking at your frost tender crops, there's this formula to figure out the last sowing date, and you're going to count back from your expected first frost date, your average first frost date. So you add together, as an example, coming up on the next slide, you add together the days from sowing to harvest, and how long you want to keep harvesting for before it comes to an end. So you might be satisfied with 1 week of harvesting, but I wouldn't be. I would want to get at least 2 or 3 weeks of harvest from those plants, having put the work in to plant them and protect them and cultivate them and water them and all the rest of it. So you add that, the length of the harvest period, and then because you're going into the fall, you add 14 days for the slowing down of growth and maturing of whatever the crop is. And then if you're not going to use row cover, you add another 14 days for the horrible possibility of an earlier than expected frost, because it would be so sad to have grown these and get them wiped out. But if you have row cover and you're paying attention to the weather forecasts, you can cover the rows of tender crops with the row cover whenever anything like a frost is expected at night, and so you don't have to do that extra 14 days. So here's the example with yellow squash. This is Zephyr squash. It's the yellow one with the green ends. We really like this squash. The number of days from seeding to harvest is about 50. They might say 49, I don't know. And we want to harvest it for 3 weeks, so we're adding 21. And then we're adding 14 days to allow for the slowing down of growth. But we're not going to add 14 days to allow for an early frost, because we're really going to watch the forecasts and have our row cover out there. And so that's 85 days to count back from our average first frost date, which is October the 14th. So that brings us to July 21st. Well, we did the calculation and then thought, oh, we don't want to stop that soon. So we decided we'd have our row cover at the ready, and we would use it during cold spells as well. Not just when it's going to be frosty, but if we have a run of a few cold days, we would just put the row cover over for a few days, and that way we don't have to take off the other 14 days. And you're probably sitting here thinking, but they can't get pollinated if they've got row cover on. And it's completely true, they can't get pollinated when they've got row cover on. But you don't have to have every single squash flower pollinated. You're basically fattening up squashes that are already pollinated. And if you get a cold spell and then you get a warm spell, you just open the row covers again, have some more pollination, and set another round of squash or whatever it is, beans, cucumbers. So we don't take off that other 14 days anymore, and we now do our last planting of squash on August the 5th. And we do our last beans on August the 3rd, and our last cucumbers also August the 5th. Our last edamame, July 14th, and our last sweet corn, July 16th. So we're kind of pushing it a bit, but we're pushing it to a level that has worked for us. We're not pushing it to very risky levels because it's too dispiriting to plant something and then have it all disappear and slimy frost. So next we're going to look at making a close fit plan of planting dates using graphs. So for each crop you want to do this for, you collect 3 pieces of information for each sowing. And these are the bits that are on that Veg Finder chart that I showed you earlier. The planting date, the date you start harvesting, and the date you stop harvesting. And this is what we do during the growing season. We just go to that chart, we write down the date, and that's all we do. We don't do any other calculations or anything at that point. So we just gather that information during the growing season and do the planning when we're not so busy. And then for the graph, you need to have the sowing date and the harvest start date that corresponds with it. This data is from several years. You can do it with just 1 year's worth, and I'll show you that in the example that's coming up. But the more years data that you have, the more representative, the more accurate, the more helpful it's going to be. So we certainly did not go out in the same year and sow on April the 18th and April the 21st and April the 20th. Those are 3 different years. So year by year you can just accumulate some more records and use that information to make your planning more helpful. So you gather that together, and then there's these 5 steps to making the graph, and we're going to go through them one at a time, and if you have questions do ask. So you make a graph for each crop, and the sowing date goes along the x-axis, and the harvest start date goes along the y-axis. And for the time being, you don't worry about the harvest finish date. You mark in your first possible sowing date and the harvest start date that you get from that. And then you decide what's your last worthwhile harvest start date for that crop, and you mark that in. And that marks the sort of beginning and end of your harvest starts. And then you're going to divide the harvest period, the harvest start date period, up into an equal number of segments. And this is going to be so that whatever you decide, every 15 days, every 20 days, you can start harvesting a new patch of whatever it is. And then you figure out the sowing dates that you need to match those harvest dates. And you'll see that it's not going to be the same number of days apart. But we'll see that in the examples. Why this one is in here? I thought it would have come later. I think, let me just, did I get these out of order? Yeah, that one slipped. Okay, I'll move it back. So we'll start with step 1. We won't do step 4 yet. Sorry about that. I must have slipped when I did that, sorting things out. So you start your graph off. This is just with 1 year's data. And you mark in your sowing date and your harvest start date for each of those times you planted something. And you can see we got this sort of wiggly line. We've got those blue diamonds. Those are the data points we got from our 1 year of collection of data. And you put those in. That's the first step. And then you look at the beginning of it, the beginning of the season. You draw a line up from your first possible sowing date and then across to show your first harvest date. This is squash, and our first harvest is going to be May the 19th. Our first planting is with transplants, so it doesn't matter for the purposes of doing this kind of graph. You can just put that in the same as anything else, same as the direct sown ones that come later. And then you look at the other end and decide what's your last worthwhile planting harvest start date. And you draw a line across from that till you meet that graph line, and drop a line down till you find out your sowing date. And you see here that we did, this is sweet corn, I think. And we had done one on it's squash again. We had done one on August the 7th. That didn't start producing squash until October the 2nd, and that was too late for us. It was too close to our expected frost date. It was too chilly, things happened slowly. We decided that we wanted to harvest starting September 24th, so we did that orangey red dotted line from September the 24th, and that gives us a sowing date of August the 5th. Now it's only 2 days earlier than the August the 7th one that didn't work. And yet there's that difference, that 7, 8, 9 day difference in when the harvest starts. So this really shows you that once you get to the fall, the rate of growth is really going to slow down, and a little difference in sowing date is going to make a big difference in harvest date.
When's your last frost usually?
April the 20th. I like to think it's the 14th.
We're about May 15th usually.
Oh, right, okay. You just feed your numbers in? Yeah. Still will work, yeah. Okay, then let's go and retrieve step 4 that I somehow got in the wrong place. So what you do next is you look at that harvest period and you divide it up into a whole number of segments according to how often you want to have whatever the crop is. So with that squash example we just had, our first one starts harvesting May the 19th, and our last one September the 24th, and that's 128 days of squash, plus however long the last planting lasts. So you decide how often you want a new patch coming online, and you divide the harvest period up into a whole number of segments. Like if we want fresh squash patch every 32 days, we divide the 128 by 32, and that gives us 4. So we're going to have 4 intervals, which means 5 plantings, because it goes planting, interval, planting, interval, planting, interval, planting, interval, planting. But you've got 5 plantings, but only 4 intervals. So you divide that up, and you figure out, you look at your harvest start date axis, you divide that up into those equal intervals, and we get harvest start dates that we're aiming for of May the 19th, June the 20th, July 22nd, August 23rd, September 24th. If you've got a May, not do it so often, or you might have a new patch more frequently.
October 10th or 15th. Our first one is like somewhere between October 10th and 15th.
Oh, that's not so different from us, yeah. Yeah.
When you plant, do you use seeds? The second?
Yeah, just the first one. The first squash and the first cucumbers are transplants. And after that, for cucumbers and squash, we're using direct sowing. All our beans are direct sown, our corn is direct sown, edamame direct sown, all those things. So then you use the graph, and we'll see this coming up. And you use the graph to get the planting dates you need, and they'll be April the 21st, May the 17th, June the 21st, July 16th, August the 5th. And the intervals in sowing are 26 days, 25 days, 25 days, 20 days. With squash, you see, it's not so different until you get to that very end of the season. They get shorter at the very end. Okay, done those. Okay, so the next step. No. Done that one. So, okay, sorry, got these scrambled. Here we go. So here's a squash succession crops graph. You see, if you've got several years worth of data, you get a really wiggly sort of line. And what that shows you is that the weather varies from year to year, which is no surprise. Also, you possibly didn't use the same variety. Or you bought the same variety but from a very different seed company, and their source is slightly different, and their growers may be actively selecting for faster maturing or not, and so you can get differences. But to make that more useful, you want a smoother line. So the next step is to smooth out the line. So you can either do this with a paper and pencil, or you can do it with a spreadsheet program. Some spreadsheet programs will have a function where they will make a smooth line for you, or a best fit line. But you can also do it with a pencil. You put the paper down, you practice, you do the air guitar, but it's air pencil. You try and get a smooth line. And your goal is to hit most of the points, but certainly to have the same number above the line as below the line. And this will become, we've got a really nice example. The one that's in your handout, the sweet corn one, shows that nicely.
I'm sorry, but it's not necessarily a straight line, right?
No, it's a best fit. Yeah, to get sort of between the points as they zigzag about. Yeah, and some crops are more curved than others. The sweet corn example is more curved than that squash one that we looked at earlier. We'll see this on the graph that's coming up, but if we want to have a fresh sweet corn patch coming in every 15 days, then we figured out we can do 6 plantings, and we'll sow them April the 26th, which is about the earliest we can safely do it, May the 19th, June the 6th, June the 24th, July the 7th, July the 16th. And that way we get fresh one coming in every 15 days. The planting intervals are going to be 23 days, 18 days, 18 days, 13 days, and 9 days. So that varies a lot more than that squash example. In the squash example, you didn't really get much shortening of the interval until the end of the season. With sweet corn, it's all the way through. And here you can see it on that graph that's on your handout. Again, this is data from many different years, and you get that zigzaggy line, and then we've got that smooth curved line. It does have the same number of points below the line as above. And we've put in our harvest start dates 15 days apart, and you can see by looking at that, those dotted lines that go from the harvest start dates are all the same distance apart. They really are, 15 days. And then each time one of those hits the smooth line, we dot it down to get the planting dates, and you can see that the gaps between those are really, really different. They really get a lot shorter as the season goes on. And this is a real life example from our records. It's nothing imaginary or anything. So for sweet corn especially, it's really worthwhile noting this, and assuming you want to have lots of sweet corn and not too much at once, you can really use this information to plan your planting dates so that you get a good, reliable supply and no big pileups and no gaps.
How did that 15 days actually, how many days do you actually harvest corn?
We do every other day. Well, we do 3 days out of 7.
And the crop that you're using lasts for 15 days, did you actually get something through that whole 15-day period?
Yeah, we have got, remember we have got those 3 varieties, so we won't be picking from the same patch of the same variety for 15 days. But at the beginning of the 15 days, we'll start on the early maturing corn, and we'll pick that, maybe go through there 3 times or something the first week, and then on the third of those,
we'll have, well, I guess what I'm saying, out of the 15 days, you'll have 7 days that the clientele, the 100 people that are eating out of the garden, that you actually don't have corn for them, where 7 of the days you do have corn for them that they're handing out. Okay.
Yeah, we get more than that. Lots of places say you should pick corn every day. Well, we just don't do that because we just...
But you wouldn't get enough to hand it to everybody that
No, not
probably would want corn every day.
No, well, that's true.
Yeah.
I mean, we do have some surplus, but we like to freeze some for the winter. So we tell the food processing people, if you see more than this number of buckets in the cooler, you can go freeze some, but leave this many for dinner because it's so popular. Yeah, but that's a good point. Yeah.
But
You would need
you
a
have it
bigger
spread
patch.
out so that you have a long area of time that, okay,
Yeah.
there's no corn this week. Next week we have corn again.
Yeah, we don't have
and
that.
everything is fine.
Right. If
Yeah.
we wanted to harvest every single day, we just would need to plant. The sequence would still work. We would just need to plant a bigger area.
Now, in your distribution to the thing, if you were, the people know to come to get, or do you have it there? Because a corn is a small window vegetable, that the longer it lays there, the less sweet it is.
Right.
So that they need to get it when you pick it.
Right. Well, we have cooks. We have a central kitchen, and we have cooks that cook dinner for everybody, all 100 people.
Oh, I see.
And you don't have to. You can go cook your own quesadillas or whatever if you want, and not go to dinner. But the easy option is to show up for dinner at 6 o'clock and get fed.
And you'll get the fresh corn.
You get fresh corn. Yeah,
Oh, wow.
because we
Okay.
take it. We try not to linger after we're harvesting various crops. But once we've harvested the corn, we try to get that up quickly to the kitchen in the cooler straight away. And then the cooks will cook it that day. It's really rare that a cook will just not
Take care of us.
Yes.
This is what we got,
Really
this is what we
rare.
cook.
Yeah.
Yes. No, that's, I understand.
It's very popular.
All right.
Okay. So we found some extra benefits also from planning succession plantings. And one is that we could save space and work. Earlier on in this, I said that we planted out 2 plantings of cucumbers, and that the second ones did better than the first ones. Well, we used to do these 6 plantings of cucumbers, and we had these intervals of 50 days, 30 days, 20 days, 16 days, and I don't know why it went up again, 17 days. Probably because we weren't working on Sundays. So what we did was we looked at our records, and we put our data into the graph, and we figured out we can go down to 5 plantings. We just don't need to plant so often. The intervals we had before were causing us to be sending boxes of cucumbers to the food bank rather more than probably the people at the food bank wanted to have cucumbers. So we've improved on it, and we now do intervals of 52 days, 25 days, 25 days, and 20 days. So we don't have to plant so often. We don't have to do so many plantings. And also, the first planting uses transplants, but now the date for our second planting is into the period when we can just direct sow, rather than trying to do 2 rounds of transplants. And that saves us quite a lot of time. So we just transplant the first ones, direct sow the second ones. Just because that's, we could see from our graph that this was going to work, and it does work indeed. There's the graph of that, not much to say about that really. Another advantage of doing the succession planting planning is that you can avoid kind of chancy sowings. We used to do 7 sweet corn plantings. Our last one was July 28th. What we used to do was, our very first planting we would do just the fast maturing variety, Predaceous, and then at the very end, for the 7th planting, we would also do just the fast maturing one. And we found that it actually worked better for us just to do 6 plantings and to have a bigger 6th planting than we would have had in order to have had 7, dividing up the land. And so now we can do all 3 of our well-loved varieties in those later plantings, and that actually does better in terms of the amount of corn we get. It comes to a slightly earlier end if it turns out to be a warm fall, but if it turns out to be an early frost, we've gained because we've already had the corn. We're not doing that late planting anymore. We're not doing that July 28th one anymore. That gives us a lot more corn. On the other hand, there are some factors in succession planting. You don't want to go too far and get too obsessive about figuring all this out. Sometimes there are little things that just make some aspects not worthwhile. We used to do our squash and cucumbers together, and then we looked at the graphs and we thought, oh, you know, squash is quicker to mature than cucumbers, and squash plantings stay good for 40 days for us. But cucumbers, we have a lot of striped cucumber beetles. Sometimes they only work for like 35 days. So you would, looked at logically, you would think that it would make more sense to do a separate planning schedule for squash and a separate one for cucumbers. And we looked at that, but then we thought the advantages do not outweigh the disadvantages. It works better for us to continue to sow them both side by side or one after another in a row because of how we've done our space use planning part. And also, you know, you're going to get out the same tools and the watering and everything. You may just as well sow the squash, sow the cucumbers, cover them over, water them, and have two jobs done, and then take the tools away. So that's what we've gone to. We don't do them on a separate schedule from each other. So don't go too far down the rabbit hole of succession planning. Sometimes, you know, a couple of days here or there, it's just, unless you're deep into the fall when it does matter, most of the year it doesn't actually matter too much to be too exact.
Do you have some favorite varieties of cucumbers that you do? Different varieties? We mostly do one that we fondly call generally. It's generally, but we call it generally. We've also grown Olympian, which is very, very similar. In fact, we tried to trial them one against the other because we thought you know, varieties come and go. You just get used to something really nice and then they pull it off the market. So we thought it would be good to have another variety that we knew worked well. So we were trying Olympian versus generally, and we had them labelled in the row, but then the plants grew bigger than the labels. We didn't keep good records from that. So either of those, I would say, works nicely. Yeah. Picklers we're still working on. We used to really like Little Leaf, and it was good for us because we get a lot of like volunteer help, inexperienced helpers. And with Little Leaf, it was easy to say, if it's got small leaves, pick small cucumbers, like pinky-sized cucumbers. And if it's got big leaves, pick big slicing cucumbers. And that worked nicely. But Little Leaf, for several years now, we've been getting bad. Turns out it's downy mildew. I thought it was angular leaf spot. Yeah, it seems like, I don't know, it seems like it doesn't do well with that. So we've been trying different ones. Yeah.
So when you do canning of pickles or tomatoes in particular, do you plan on getting a large yield in 1 week or so you can kind of optimize your canning process? In which case, it would affect this.
We do a huge planting of Roma paste tomatoes, and it goes on and on and on and on and on for weeks. And the poor old food processing crew just keep on canning twice a week for many weeks. The pickling cucumbers we just do twice. We do them alongside our second slicing cucumbers and our fourth slicing cucumbers, so they get a break in the middle on the pickles. Really, they're working hard. They have one thing after another. We don't have like a factory for canning, so we don't really want a huge amount at once. We don't want to overwhelm the human beings doing the job, so we actually keep them going for weeks. Yeah.
Do the residents take things to their own personal kitchens, or is the food only for the central kitchen?
Oh, yeah. So we don't actually have personal kitchens. We have residence buildings which often have a kitchen, but you'd be sharing it with other people that have rooms in the house. And you can go to the walk-in cooler at the big kitchen and take whatever you want. Not just stuff in the cooler, but you can go rice and beans and oil and salt and all the rest of it. And yeah, you can take it off and cook it wherever you,
So the cooks kind of set things aside, like if corn's really popular, those
sometimes
buckets would be kind of protected, you couldn't take some to the
sometimes they do.
Okay.
Cooks vary. Sometimes you'll see them with big things of masking tape over.
Okay.
Tuesday dinner.
Yes.
dinner tonight.
And how many meals are provided at the communal kitchen?
Lunch and dinner.
Lunch and dinner.
Yeah.
Do you ever save seeds from your crops?
We do save seeds from our Roma paste tomatoes and from our crimson sweet watermelons, and I've been selecting for earliness and flavour and like disease resistance, and I sell those to Southern Exposure. You can buy them through there, and they say Virginia Select on them.
But you don't use them yourself?
Oh yeah, of course.
You do use them soon?
Yeah, we have to keep up. You know, to grow and to sell.
As opposed to just buying new seed every year.
Right, most things we're buying new seed every year. We're growing a lot of different vegetables, and we could never, even if we had the time to do the seed growing, we wouldn't have the isolation distance that you would need, you know. And when we're doing things like we're sowing 3 sweet corn varieties on the same day, we have anti-isolation, you could say. And also we grow a lot of hybrid crops. We do choose a lot of hybrid varieties. So that wouldn't work. Yeah.
You've been working on the Butternut Squash, and they're wonderful.
Oh,
Just
great.
want to tell you about
Okay. Right, that's not my bit, but yes, this is another aspect of Twin Oaks, is we do have a seed growing department, you could say, and they have their fields away from our gardens, so that, and they figure things out really carefully so that they do have the isolation distances for the crops. So they can't, like, they don't usually grow any like summer squash or zucchini. They grow cucumbers, but when you're growing those for seed, you wait till they're great big yellowy orange blimps.
The ones done for seed are completely distinct from the ones for crops, for using.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah. That works best for us. In some things, like the squash, the butternut squash, the seeds people grow those on their fields, which are like 3 miles up the road, and we do eat the squash because with winter squash, the seeds are mature at the same time as the food is mature, and with peppers as well. But with other things like cucumbers, no. Yeah, you wouldn't want to eat those.
So do you have beehives on your property?
We do, yeah.
And how do you keep that, or do you keep, is it for your garden or is it for the seed producing garden?
We have them near the food gardens, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they don't have beehives out at the seed growing place. But I think they just rely on what's around. Yeah, but you know, with growing organically, you're more likely to have a lot of different pollinators alive still, so that makes sense.
Do you have favorite suppliers for seeds that you recommend, or?
Well, we buy the more southern kind of vegetables. Okra, we always get that from Southern Exposure. We buy a lot of seeds from Fedco. They're in Maine. They're cooperative, and they do really good bulk discounts. The bigger the bag, the cheaper the seeds. We've been buying from them for years. Johnny's we buy from. It kind of depends who's got the variety that we want. That, you know, we've tried out a lot of different varieties. Some work better than others. What works for us? So those are the 3 that we buy most of our seeds from. Because Southern Exposure, they're mostly selling seeds to home gardeners, so they have small packets of seeds. They don't so much do bulk. So if we want a lot of seed, we buy from Fedco. Sometimes, you know, there's a variety that we really want that none of those have. We buy some things from Osborne Seeds. We bought from High Mowing. Whoever's got the thing, we've got our heart set on at the best price. That's what we do. Okay, the Mexican bean beetles. So we used to have really bad trouble with the Mexican bean beetles. Here's the mug shots. So we used to do 7 plantings, and we did them at 15-day intervals. And after we'd been harvesting for 2 weeks, they were in a terrible state, the plants, and we did what we euphemistically called root checks, which means pulling up the plants. It was a popular job in that you can pull up the bean plant and stand up and pick the pods off standing up. So it was popular in that way, but it was really time consuming. The plants wouldn't last for very long. If you don't know them, they look like ladybugs on steroids, but they're sort of yellowy orange, and the stripes are in rows crossways, and the larva is that yellow fuzzy thing. And the damage they do is they go along the leaf surface and they scrape the juicy part of the leaf off, and they just leave the papery skeleton. So then the leaf can't photosynthesize, so your crops are not going to get enough sunshine. They were awful. So now we buy the parasitic wasp I'm going to tell you about. We sow 6 times, not 7, at these sowing intervals that we looked at. We get more beetles than we used to get, and they're a lot prettier. So if you can manage it, I recommend buying this parasite. They're tiny little wasps. Now don't get alarmed at the thought of wasps. They're just like midges. They're really tiny. They're not going to sting you. They don't overwinter, so we have to buy them every year. But sometimes we get a lucky year when we've had good enough control the previous year using these pedio wasps that we don't have enough overwintered adult Mexican bean beetles coming up out of the ground, and so we don't have to buy the parasite that year. So it might be every 10 years or something for us. They come to you either as the adult wasps in a little plastic cup thing with a ventilation thing on the top, or as parasitized Mexican bean beetle larvae. They're called mummies. So they look like the yellow fuzzy things, except they're brown. And they're really just the dry case of the larva with lots and lots of eggs of the parasite inside. And they hatch out. So you want to order them as soon as you see larvae. You don't want to order them when you only see the adults, which is what overwinters. So if you see the adult Mexican bean beetles, then you need to just keep watching. And when you see the mummies, you order them. You only need to do it, assuming nothing goes wrong, you only need to do it the one time at the beginning of when you're first bean planting. Some people even advocate doing a sort of decoy small bean planting and then waiting a bit before you start your main bean plantings, but we're too greedy to do that. We want to have beans early on. So you can buy them in units of 20 mummies, which will hatch out 400 to 500 wasps. And you want to do that for 1,000 square feet of bees. You can combine with your neighbors. When they hatch, the wasps will fly quite long distances. So if you
get the mummies, do you have to order them sooner because it takes a longer period for them to hatch and start reproducing?
Right. As soon as you see the larvae, you can order the mummies. But if you went away for the weekend or something, and you're seeing lots and lots and lots of the larvae, then it's probably best to go ahead and order the adult wasps because they'll get into action quicker. And you order them from this New Jersey Department of Agriculture Beneficial Insect Rearing Laboratory. There is a website, but it's not, you can't order online or anything. They're very phone based. So you call up that number, you talk to Tom, and it's good to plan ahead of time and call early in the season and kind of get your name and address on their records, and it helps them to know how many they're likely to be asked to provide. And then the day you see the larvae, you call up, and hopefully on a Monday, Tuesday or Wednesday, you call up and then they'll ship them to you, and they'll say very apologetically, we won't bill you till the fall, would that be okay? They must be devoted to rearing the insects. It's refreshing to deal with them. So you don't want to get stuck over the weekend. So they don't ship on Fridays and they're not there on Saturdays and Sundays. So you want to call Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. If you call Wednesday, if you call in the morning, you'll get same day. They'll ship them out same day. You don't want to get the things stuck in UPS over the weekend, or it's happened to me one year, July the 4th weekend. And it's pricey if you're just doing a home garden, but if you get together with your neighbours, especially if you do it in time to order the mummies, and then they're little dried brown things, they're not hatched out yet, and you can share them out and take them. You put them under your bean rows on the ground where you see the larvae. And you do that in the evening when it's not too hot, and then they'll hatch out and they'll deal with the problem for you. Yeah. Okay, we don't need nothing to say about that really. So moving on to talking about winter greens in the hoop house. I do have a whole other slideshow about fall and winter hoop houses, and you can see that on slideshare.net. We put up our hoop house in order to grow fresh food for eating during the winter. Salads, mostly salads and cooking greens. Those were the two things we wanted to have fresh all winter. We also do those small turnips, the sort of gourmet turnips and radishes. We grow too many radishes actually, and scallions, and a few other things like that. So we just love our hoop house. It's a really valuable space. It's really nice to work in there in the winter. The rate of growth is much faster in there than your crops would be outside. And to many people's surprise, crops can actually tolerate lower temperatures in the hoop house than if you had them outside. It's thought to be that they can recover better during the warm days, so they can endure colder nights than they would be able to outside. Ours is double plastic layer, inflated, so we've got the insulating value of that air bubble. When we had that really cold winter a couple of years ago, we did for the first time bring row covers out to the hoop house to put over the crops on the really cold nights. Previously, we had not used row covers inside the hoop house in the winter. We would just take them in there, like when we first planted out the tomatoes and stuff, we would have row covers because it still might get frosty. But for the winter, we didn't use row covers until we got that really cold spell. So when we put row covers over inside the hoop house, we've seen that our salad greens survived when it was -12 Fahrenheit outside. And without the inner cover, they survived +14 outside, but they were inside, if you know what I mean.
How heavy is your compost on the ground in there? Is your soil that you're planting very heavily composted, or?
Well, we try to, because you're sort of burning through the organic matter in there. So
I mean, but it's compost that you have in there still working to give off heat?
No, we don't use our compost until it's cooled down. Yeah, so we're not getting any heating effect from the compost, just from the sun.
Okay.
Yeah, and then insulating. So similarly, this is what you might. Well, we don't really need a Veg Finder for inside the hoop house. So what we have instead is on our planting schedule, we have these columns that are over to the right, the harvest start and the harvest finish. And so we write in there when we start harvesting something, when we finish. And that's our record keeping that we're going to use for planning our succession crops for the hoop house. And the rest of it is like instructions on where to plant and how many rows and all the rest of it. In tiny print in that harvest start and harvest finish squares, we put our information from previous years so we know what to expect. And then we leave plenty of space so that when it actually happens this year, we can write that in to compare and to modify our information. Okay, there's some things to consider about winter hoop house successions. One is that seeds can germinate a lot slower if they're in the ground in the hoop house in the winter than you might expect. The second one is that those days to maturity number that are in the catalogues are really referring to spring conditions. So in the winter, it's going to be slower. So add 14 days or so if you're looking at that. And if the catalogue comes from a different bioregion, beware of that. So if you're looking at Johnny's catalogue, Fedco, they're both wonderful catalogues. They are up in Maine, so it's different up there. So don't be expecting it to mirror exactly what they say. We do succession plantings of several things. I think this is in your handout. I forgot to look through. Did I put that in? Or did I leave it out? Oh, I did put it in. Good. Okay. So we do 2 sowings each of chard, mizuna, scallions, tatsoi, and Yucchina savoy, which is a cold hardy. It's a bit like a big tatsoi, and it's also cold hardy. So we do 2 of each of those in the course of the winter. We do 3 sowings of turnips and of bulbing onions. We didn't do this anymore, but we sow the bulbing onions in the hoop house in the ground in November, and then March the 1st or so, whenever we can do it, we dig them up and plant them out in the garden outside. And that's the way we've found to give us the best bulbing onions in our region, where it's tricky. We do 4 sowings of baby lettuce mix, the kind that you cut with the scissors for salad mixes. And we do 5 sowings of spinach and radish. And they're in that table, which is in your handout. There's some interesting features of it. It's in alphabetical order there. So if you go down to the tatsoi, for instance, the first sowing we do is September the 7th. And that feeds us for the whole of November and December. We cut some. Of course, we're eating a lot of other things as well. But it will last for 2 months. Whereas the second one we sow middle of November, and that really only will feed us for a few weeks because it's going to bolt in spring. A lot of these greens, if you've been growing them during the cold weather in your hoop house, they're going to bolt really earlier than they would outside in the spring because they've had the cold. Now it's really warm, they're going to bolt. So you've got to be kind of on your toes about getting those harvested and used. And you might be thinking, well, why don't they sow somewhere between September the 7th and November the 15th? And the answer is because we do like tatsoi, but everywhere else is full of other crops. So it's not really so possible. We decided we'd rather have the other crops in this case. With the turnips, we do a 3rd sowing, but it only really works for us if we really thin it really quickly. Like don't sort of wait and think, oh, I'll thin it tomorrow. But we thin it really quickly and really soon. I don't mean we move fast, we do it early. And then we will harvest those turnips a bit smaller than we harvested the turnips in the 1st sowing and the 2nd sowing because they're going to want to bolt as soon as they can, and we want to eat them before they bolt. So there's things like that to be aware of with the winter crops in the hoop house. We have used grafts, especially for our radishes. As you saw, we do 5 or sometimes 6 sowings of radishes. We use the same method as I showed you with those summer succession crops. Some crops will bolt in January, like Tokyo Bacana and Maruga Santo. Those are those non-heading Asian greens that are kind of, the colour is called chartreuse. It's like yellowy green, they're very tender leaf things. They will bolt first, really early, so it's good to use those up. Tatsoi will bolt February, early March. So it's good to know when things might bolt, so push first. This is our radish succession crops graph. Another thing we do is we sow these filler greens. This is not a scheduled thing really. We make short sowings of lettuce and spinach and some of the Asian greens, and we use those to fill gaps whenever we have a gap. So if a gap happens in a spinach row, we use a spinach plant. If a gap happens in a lettuce row, we use a lettuce plant. The Asian greens we kind of use as a sort of mix and match. Because we're trying to do a rotation in there, we think, oh, a brassica is a brassica, so it doesn't matter whether we fill this gap with Senpo Sai, our favourite, or Yukinis or whatever. We try to fill those gaps up and keep the whole house productive. And of course, you can see here, these are a bit big for transplanting out. These are kind of, you can eat them at this stage as well. You can either cut them up into a salad mix, or you can use them as sort of adolescent cooking greens. But that's just a way you can use a small area to sow some things that will be an insurance against gaps. And sometimes gaps happen for a good reason, like you managed to sell more Chinese cabbage than you expected, and now the whole space is empty, and you can replant. That. Thing I wanted to mention is that I use the term succession planting to refer to successions of the same crop in different places. Some people use the term to mean one crop and then another one succeeding it in the same area. I call those follow-on crops, and these are ones that worked for us in our hoop house. Our first radishes are followed by our second scallions on 11/17. We do baby brassica salad mix, which we cut with scissors the same way you do a lettuce mix. We mix that in with our salad mix. We replace that with our fifth radishes on December the 23rd. And some of our first spinach we replace with a baby lettuce mix that we sow New Year's Eve. And the lettuce starts to, we've been harvesting that spinach for quite a while by then, it's past its best. We replace our first tatsoi with our fourth spinach on January 15th, the Tokyo Bacana on January 16th with a fresh sowing of spinach. We're actually going to plant that outdoors. One of the things we do in our hoop house in January is to make some sowings that we're going to transplant outdoors. That works well for us. It's a lot less work than dealing with 30 flats or something. The pak choi and the Chinese cabbage we replace around about January 24th with a sowing of kale that's going to go outdoors. The second radishes area gets sown with a new baby brassica salad mix on 1st February, and then we take out more of our first spinach to do some dwarf snap peas on the 1st of February. So we're really keeping all the space in use as much as we can. And we start planting out our summer crops in the middle of March, usually. We've delayed a week this year. So we're really packing stuff in. You can get a lot of food out of a small area if it's in a hoop house.
Are you saying that you plant like the spinach, you'll put that in the ground in the hoop house and then transplant it out?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Not in flats.
Right. Yes. It's an older method. It's called bare root transplants. It works really well for us. They've got a whole mass of the soil to grow roots in and to draw water from, and so they grow really well, and they're stronger plants, and we're not taking them far. It's not like we're shipping them somewhere or buying them at the market. We just dig some up. We go back and forth, actually. I say to people, I give them a dish pan and a trowel, and I say, okay, dig up what you think is 30 minutes worth. What's going to take you 30 minutes to transplant? And then we'll plant those, water those, and then come back and get some more. It's a really easy method. Yeah, and it doesn't take a lot of hoop house space to grow a lot of transplants. Okay, moving on to the year-round lettuce. We do have one of those graphs for lettuce. It's very crowded with data. We do all of our outdoor lettuce as transplants. For the earlier ones, we're doing transplants from open flats like you see here. For the later ones, we have an outdoor nursery seed bed. We sow them in the ground outdoors, water them and look after them there, and then we dig those up and we're doing the bare root transplants. So we're planting out 120 heads a week, and we're hoping to eat 120 heads a week. Of course, some of those go wrong. We're actually hoping to eat 100 heads a week. So without showing you every point on the graph, here's the short version, which is much easier to get to grips with. We sow twice in January, twice in February, and every 10 days in March, every 9 days in April, every 8 days in May, every 6 or sometimes 7 days through June and July, and you can kind of see where we're headed. We sow every 5 days in early August, and then by the time we get to the end of August, it's every 3 days. And then we have these killer 3 weeks in September when we're sowing every other day. This is because the time to harvest is really going to stretch out. This really works. And then we don't really need more sowings after that for outdoors. So we just do a couple more sowings for insurance every 3 days. We don't eat lettuce from outdoors in the winter anymore. Now we've got our hoop house and it's so much easier. We used to plant in cold frames, and we've even done beds of lettuce with like thick double row cover. You can keep lettuce alive in quite cold weather. It doesn't grow much, so you want to have it sort of grown to harvestable size before it gets really, really cold, and then you can go out and harvest leaves off of those plants. But once you've got a hoop house, you think things like that are hard work. Instead, you can just go into the hoop house and take off your hat and coat and walk along paths and harvest, and you don't have to deal with a frozen row cart and stuff. So we don't do it that way anymore. But we do plant some into our greenhouse, which is where we start our seedlings. We grow some lettuce in there over the winter. It's not a very big space, but we do have some. But otherwise, this is all for outdoors. Some tips on hot weather lettuce sowing. This is when lettuce is actually harder, I think, in the hot weather, not the cold weather. Lettuce likes 40 to 80 Fahrenheit, and the optimum is 75 degrees soil temperature for germination. It will come up in just 2 days. The maximum germination temperature is 85. So if it's got to a really hot time of year, you want to do what you can to cool down whatever it is you're sowing your lettuce seeds in. Some people do this by sowing plastic flat with lettuce, watering it, putting it inside a clean plastic bag loosely, and putting it in the fridge. You know, if you're using a domestic fridge, you want to keep it clean. You can put it flat. If you've got a basement with a concrete floor, be cool down there, you can put the flat on the floor in the basement. What we do is we sow ours outdoors. We use shade cloth. We sow rows. We go out just before the sun goes down. When it's starting to cool down, we sow it then. We water it with freshly drawn cold water. And this is the silly bit, but it really works. I get ice cubes and I line them up like a little train set along the rows. We used to have an ice machine with crushed ice. It was much easier, but now we don't have that machine anymore. So I do the ice cubes, and they melt. Put the shade cloth on the top, and over the night, the ice cubes melt pretty quickly actually. That will help break the heat dormancy of the lettuce seed, and it will start to sprout that night. You won't see it, you won't see it for a few days. But it comes up pretty quickly then, so long as you can keep the soil moist after the first cool period. And choose heat tolerant varieties. There's the lettuce gravel. Yeah, many sowings.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Just as far as like getting a large crop of some of these leaf vegetables, is it better to? It sounds like what you do is you harvest the entire plant at once, right?
With the lettuces outdoors, yes.
Yeah. What about how do you think that compares to just simply taking the outer leaves and letting it keep going and going? Right.
We do a lot of that, especially the winter crops, or the stuff in the hoop house, and we do that for kale and collards and senposai outdoors. But for lettuce, we prefer just to cut the whole heads out when we're growing it outdoors. It's partly a time thing. It's partly keeping it from wilting before we get it up to the kitchen.
Okay. I don't know if you've got increased productivity. It's better to plant lots of different, heads of lettuce, or just to keep the one you have, just keep taking those outer leaves.
Yeah. Once it gets warm, they can get bitter if they're growing for too long. So I think it's outdoors in warm weather. It's better to do head lettuce and cut the heads. Yeah.
Right.
Do think so. Yeah. Okay. The growing degree days method. That I don't know much about. I understand the concept. It's a way of measuring how much heat has accumulated during the year so far, and you can use it to indicate when it's got warm enough to plant tender crops, or also to figure out, to project when something might be ready for harvest. And you can also use it to plan succession croppings, which I have not done yet. And the good thing about growing degree days is it's going to reflect the actual conditions that year at your farm. So it's going to be much more useful information than any kind of calendar or any kind of granddad always planted on St. Patrick's Day kind of thing, because the climate's changing and we're going to have to adapt to that. So growing degree days, I do think, is a way of the future. We can find out more about it. I've got some, on the next slide, I've got some links and some references. Usually how it works is there's a base temperature. Often it's 50 Fahrenheit because they reckon that's when the warmer temperature things are really starting to grow. So every day when the temperature rises above that, you accumulate some growing degree days. So we wanted to work it out yourself manually. You need a maximum minimum thermometer, and you add together the maximum for the day before and the minimum for the 24-hour period. Add them together, divide by 2 to get the average, and then subtract the 50 degrees, and the number that you're left with is the growing degree days. And you add that figure for that day to the figure that you've got for the year so far. And if you slip below 50, you've got to start all over again. There's this, I was going to say, a surprisingly good explanation on Wikipedia. You know, Wikipedia can be very variable. This is a really good Wikipedia page. You can also get a phone app for free from farmprogress.com, and Cliff Slade at VSU is using this, and he says it's really good. There's a website where you can read about using growing degree days to plan for succession planting of sweet corn. And there's this other one where you can learn all sorts of stuff. It's from Oregon State Small Farms. So if you want to look further into that, those are the resources, and I think I've got those in your handout. And the rest is just the resources, which is definitely in the handout, so I won't read you those. There's the contact information again. We've still got 25 minutes for questions and chatting and looking at books. And
Can you tell me a little bit about your process for composting?
Yeah, do it on a pretty large scale, but without any specialized equipment. We use the tractor and a bucket to turn the piles. And we make our compost from not just the kitchen scraps, some weeds. When it's really hot, we just pull the weeds out and leave them on the surface if they've not got too many seeds. We make tofu. Another of our businesses is making and selling tofu, and there's a byproduct of tofu making that's called okara, and it looks like cottage cheese. It's high nitrogen, so we use that, and we use wood chips or sawdust that we trade for. We have a farmer nearby who makes compost on a commercial scale, and so he's always out looking for sources to make compost out of. So we trade him some okara for some wood chips. So the biggest ingredients in our compost are the okara and the wood chips, and then the kitchen scraps, and then the garden crop refuse and stuff. And so it's done just in big piles in the open, watered when it's needed, turned when it's needed. I don't do it myself. The man who does it is really good at it. He's been doing it for years. He reads my mind about when we need a fresh supply. It's really good stuff. It's well broken down. It's not still hot. It doesn't spring up many weeds. I guess I'm lucky.
How long does it take to get to the point where you...
Yeah, that is something I don't actually really know. It takes a long time over the winter, and then sometimes by the time we get to late summer, there's a bit of a pile up, and you can stockpile it. Yeah.
Do you have to manure?
We don't put manure in it. We used to, and then somebody pointed out that our phosphorus levels were really high in the soils, and that one of the ways that can get worse is by using animal manures. We weren't really using very much animal manure in there, as it happened. We were mostly using the scraped up waste feed hay from around the feeders. It's not like we had some animals sort of producing for us. We didn't really. So it was mostly hay, really. But we stopped including that because of the concern about the phosphorus.
Yeah. Do you ever use any biodynamic methods?
I don't. I know some people who do, and I've read about it, but I'm not that way inclined myself.
It's kind of weird, but yeah. I use the planting calendar.
Oh yeah, I did when I lived in when I still lived in England, when I was living in Yorkshire. 1 year I did use the planting calendar where you plant by the moon, and it says this is a leaf day, this is a root day, and all that. Yeah, I tried that, but I was very frustrated with it because where I lived the weather was awful. And any day when it wasn't raining was a good planting day. I think that my attitude to all that sort of stuff is that if it makes a difference, it's very sort of fine and delicate, and there's much more major things that I could work on getting right or getting better first. like having really good compost, getting rid of the weeds and that sort of basic stuff. I feel like I'm still working on that stuff, and the other stuff might make a difference, but
Yeah, I mean, I've been using that tree paste they make out of on wounds of trees.
Yeah.
It seems to really heal it.
Oh, that's nice.
I've had a really bad wound in a cherry tree.
Oh yeah.
I think the way I did it, sprayed it all up and it on.
Yeah.
It's healed really, really nicely.
Oh, that's nice.
Something kind of works.
That makes, I can see sense in that, because you think, oh, manure has lots of different little organisms in it, and they could help, stop funguses growing and that sort of thing. I can see how that would work, but some of those things where you bury cow horns, I don't.
Yeah.
Not really my cup of tea. Yeah.
I first read about this on one of your slideshows about nitrates accumulating in winter greens.
Yeah.
And I've been quite paranoid about it.
Oh.
Could you talk about ways to prevent that and how much of a danger that is? And is there any way to actually get the vegetables tested so you know if you have a problem?
I don't know if there's a way you can get them tested. Maybe through USDA. I don't know. It's the thing. It's in the fall and winter hoop house slideshow, and I think it's in the cold hardy winter vegetables one as well. And I think it's in the book. So this is about when you're growing leafy vegetables in the winter when you've got not much daylight. It seems to be more of an issue in hoop houses because the plants do actually grow more than they would if they were outside. So it's when you've got short day length that it matters. And how it happens is that the plant's roots during the night are drawing up the nitrates and other compounds from the soil. And then during the daytime, the process of photosynthesis, they're converting those nitrates to more leaves. And so if you wait for enough sunlight, like it takes 6 hours or so to convert those nitrates into safer to eat leaf materials. So if you can do your harvesting in the afternoon, then that's much better than doing your harvesting in the morning. That's one way you can make the difference. Another way is to make sure you ventilate the hoop house well when it's anything like warm enough, when it's not actually freezing cold outside. Let more air in so it gets the air exchange so that you're not limiting photosynthesis by not having enough carbon dioxide coming through. So those are the big two. Avoiding animal manures is another one that they say helps reduce the level of nitrates. Nitrates are bad for you. Well, there's been a lot recently about how bad bacon is for you. But in your body, the nitrates can get converted into the nitrites, which are not good for you, too big of a dose. And those can get further converted into these nitrosamines, which are carcinogenic.
If you have in your soil a higher carbon content, would it not hold the nitrates longer for the plants not to pull them in?
Well, you do need the plants to pull in the nitrates in order to...
Yeah, no, I know that, but I mean, I'm a grazer, for example, and the higher carbon content slows down the amount of nitrates that a plant can pull in.
Yeah.
So that if you're worried about that, I guess what I was saying is that if you had a higher content of carbon in your soil, the plant won't pull up more. Because if you just put the nitrates in, they're going to pull it up.
Oh yeah.
Which are harmful to the animal in my grazing process. Right. In the wintertime. That's the one time your biggest problem.
I didn't think to say avoid chemical fertilizers.
Yeah, and I mean that's an instant way to put immediate nitrates, and then the plant doesn't have a way to work it out because it's going to be a greater amount, just like you said, because the growing period is slower. And but if you have more carbon, the carbon has a natural, it'll stick, and then it will, as it breaks down, we'll release it in a slower pattern.
I mean, I don't think we need to be paranoid about it because eating greens is better than not eating greens. Really, just don't eat loads of turnip greens every day.
So do you avoid harvesting on cloudy days?
To be honest, no. We do harvest in the afternoons. If I had any choice about it, like if it was a really cloudy day and the forecast was going to be sunny for the next day and we didn't really need to harvest turnip greens and kale and Chinese greens or something, then I would just harvest the thing that was going to build up the least have the least nitrate buildup, and leave the rest to harvest the next day. If I knew I didn't need it. But if I needed it, I would harvest it, because I think it's better for people to have fresh vegetables. I mean, what are they going to have instead, and what's that going to have in it? You know, if you don't supply the fresh greens, what will people eat instead?
So which greens accumulate less?
I know the turnip greens are particularly bad.
Is spinach one that accumulates?
Spinach does, yes. Maybe it's in the book.
And using compost is okay?
Yeah, using compost.
As long as it's not made with animal manure?
Yeah, if it doesn't have animal manure, yeah, it's better. Because compost releases its nutrients more slowly than like...
Because you got to have the nitrogen in the compost. It's like you said, you're using a vegetable base nitrogen that you're using to make your compost, as opposed to one that would have a higher from the manure. I mean, because the manure, pure nitrogen, is an enormous amount. Everything you smell is nitrogen in the manure. So that where she's using a plant base, so she's already got a friendly nitrogen that's not going to be as hard to absorb up with whatever carbon. And,
so then is using animal manure compost in the hoop house okay in the summer, or does it accumulate and linger long enough?
In the summer it's not such an issue, because you've got the long daylight, you've got the warmer temperatures, the photosynthesis can all happen faster. Oh, I thought I just found it now. As I said earlier, I've got the wrong glasses. Page 98 or page 250, I bet it's on page 250. Yeah, I can't actually remember the order of which things are going to accumulate least.
Okay.
Oh no, that's the lettuce chapter. Oh,
that's okay. I'm going to buy one.
It's in here. It's in here somewhere. Yeah.
98 was the other.
98. Thanks. I don't think it's. Well, maybe it's going to be that early. Oh yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Does it putting in a higher mineral content in the soil slow down the amount of nitrate that the plant is full of?
Oh, that's interesting. I don't know. Right, spinach contains about twice as much nitrate as lettuce. Don't eat just raw spinach every day, all day kind of thing. Choosing varieties that are suited for winter will help, because those are varieties that are best at photosynthesizing in low light levels, so they're converting the nitrates better. So don't do summer varieties of things. Well, you probably wouldn't anyway, because you want them to be hardy. Avoid the animal fertilizers. Oh yeah, water enough but not excessively. Fresh air we mentioned. Waiting to harvest we mentioned. The overcast days. Harvesting things a little under mature rather than over mature will help. Using the stuff soon after you've harvested it, don't have it lingering around, especially at those sort of, I think 40 degrees is kind of the worst. You want to get it into a refrigerator quickly. Okay, so that's but keep eating the greens.
In no-till areas, are there particular crops that you plant in the no-till areas versus kind of all experimental?
We've stopped experimenting with no-till. What we do now is we just do our paste tomatoes on the no-till, because we do that Ryan vetch, and actually we put Austrian winter peas in as well. To get enough biomass of that, we need to sow it the second week of September. So we have to have a crop that's already finished completely by the second week of September to get the cover crop in, to get it big enough to give us enough mulch coverage and enough nitrogen from the vetch. And so we want to wait till the vetch is flowering to get the most from it. So we can't do an early crop. And also, if you want early crops, it doesn't work well with no-till, because the soil is cold compared to tilling it up. So it's good to choose a crop which is you plant later and you're not in a hurry for. And our paste tomatoes are perfect for that, because our people that are going to do the endless hours of canning, poor dears, it doesn't, if we start this week or we start that week, they don't need to start particularly early, because it's a stored product. And that's the only one we do now, I think. only no-till. Yeah. There's been the New Farm organisation has quite a bit of research about it. It was kind of a big trend or a big craze for a while, and then people have found out it doesn't work so well for everything. So, especially organically, if you can read lots of no-till stuff, but they're actually going and they're spraying herbicide to kill everything off, and then they're planting into it. And I'm not going to recommend that. Yeah.
How do you deal with the cucumber beetles? They seem like I almost want to give up growing cucumbers. They just wilt and get mildew within a week or two. Do you use any organic pesticides for those?
Well, what we do first is whenever we transplant or sow cucumbers or squash outside, we cover the rows and we keep them covered until they're flowering. And then we take the covers away to let the pollinators in. So that helps. It helps the plants to get big and sturdy before the beetles get a chance. We tackle them early in the year in our hoop house squash crop, and we're the predators. We have this pair of long pointy tweezers, and every morning we go through the squash flowers and we nip the cucumber beetles because they spend the night inside the squash flowers. So we get there early, and not super early, but first job is to squash the cucumber beetles until we get the numbers down to a manageable level.
That's in the greenhouse?
Yes, the hoop house, yeah. And then we hope we have kind of got a lot of the... But last year, our first outdoor squash planting was very close to the hoop house, and it was swamped with loads and loads of cucumber beetles, and I used spinosad. And that really did well.
Early, if you can look under the leaves and find all the eggs.
Yeah.
I go out there with it works. I go out with packaging tape and get all the eggs up. That worked really well for me.
Packaging tape, like
stick
round.
Yeah, you just do round packaging tape and get the eggs off.
Yeah.
And just smush them.
Do they look the same as like squash bug eggs? Or, I don't think I've ever noticed the cucumber beetle eggs.
Yeah, I haven't paid much attention to that.
They're very similar.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
It worked for me. But you have to be pretty diligent and get it early and get
on the underside.
Yeah.
You do the same for the squash bugs because they devastate the pumpkins.
The squash bugs is what works best for me with the squash bugs.
Yeah, I like that packaging tape.
Yeah, but they're not using chemicals, and I cut down the year before they were just decimated, and then when I did that, it worked. It's just labor intensive, but at least you're saving your
labor intensive.
Do you plant a lot of herbs?
I don't do them myself. We have someone else who does a separate herb garden, but quite a lot of different ones. Culinary amethyst. She does it all, and raised beds, permaculture kind of way. Yeah, raised beds and no mechanical tools at all, just hand.
Do you think some of the succession planting techniques could work within a smaller area, like a small raised bed? Or lettuce or parsley or that?
Oh yeah, when we plant our lettuce, I said we plant 120 heads a week. It's like a third of one of our beds. So we just say, okay, this bed is for lettuce 1, 2, and 3, and this bed is for 4, 5, and 6, and so on. And so we just plant the first third and we cover over that if we're going to, and then the next week we do the middle third, and the next week we do the third third. Yeah, you can definitely do it whatever scale. There's just there's a little bit of a danger depending on the pest situation and diseases that you've got. That if you're planting one thing right next to an older version of the same thing, that any diseases or pests that are on the older one could pop over to the fresh food next door.
What's the hottest part of the summer that you put in any plants in your hoop house? Or is that dormant?
No, we don't leave it dormant. We actually grow, this is another seed crop we grow. We grow a seed crop of southern peas, cowpeas, in there over the high summer.
And then with the what?
southern peas, cowpeas.
Yeah.
And we've also done soybean, edamame. We used to grow our own.
And that would be
seeds.
through most of the house?
Hottest bit.
Okay.
Yeah, we put shade cloth over the house for the
So to hold the
summer.
heat down, but you can get a crop in there.
Oh yeah,
And,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, actually I think hoop houses are really good places to do seed crops in the summer because you don't get all those molds and stuff. The air is drier.
Do you do any intentional companion planting where you say, I'm going to put these two crops together and then these, or does that not fit into your?
We sometimes put things like interplanting because they fit space-wise and time-wise, but we don't do any companion planting in the sense of carrots love tomatoes, kind of that sort of thing. We've often done, we're doing some this year, sowing snap peas down the middle of an overwintered bed of spinach or a spring planted bed of spinach, because the spinach will be over relatively early and then the peas will grow up and we can trellis them. But we can use the same piece of row cover for both. Wow. So we often do that. We sometimes transplant okra into the middle of a bed of cabbage or something else. We've done peanuts in the middle of a bed of lettuce. We just make sure to do romaines or small bibs so that we've got bigger space in the middle.
Is there anything you absolutely like avoid putting close to each other, like do not put like legumes and onions together? I guess I read all these things, I wonder how real they are.
Yeah, I think a lot of those things have not been tested out.
Yeah.
I wouldn't worry. I don't worry about those.
You'll put anything beside each other, you don't try to rearrange your garden so that things aren't adjacent or anything?
No, unless it's a question of shade.
Yeah.
Like if we've got really tall plants and then something else that wants sun, then we don't put it behind something tall. Yeah.
As far as your rotation, kind of the same thing, like it doesn't bother you to, like one year you get onions planted to put peas in the next season, that doesn't figure into your, like these things I avoid because I've read it, but I don't really know how real they are.
Yeah, I don't know how real they are either, and hardly any of them have actually been tested. When we first made our crop rotation, that thing I showed you, we were trying to decide what sequence to use. You know, should we have the potatoes after the corn or the corn after the potatoes? And we did just randomly say, oh, okay, the potatoes I've forgotten which way around it is now. That one particular sequence was set to do well. We were reading Elliot Coleman's book, and he's not woo-woo at all, but he did say, you know, there's a lot written about which things do better after this, and some of them have been tested and some of them haven't. And so we followed one that he did and sort of took off from there.
I think we have time for maybe one last question.
What material, when you were talking about covering the cucumbers until they flower, what material are you actually using for covering rows?
We used to use a thick row cover, but since we discovered Protect Net, we've been using that. It's really good. You want to make sure you get the right mesh size for the insects you're trying to keep off, though, because it comes in different mesh sizes. Protect, P-R-O-T-E-K. N-E-T. It's made in Canada by Dubois Engineering, but you can, if you want a lot, you can buy it direct from them, and they don't charge shipping if you spend $300 or something. But you can buy smaller amounts from Purple Mountain Organics in Maryland, or I'm not sure if Johnny's has started selling it, but they will. It's becoming more widely used, and it's very nice. It's expensive, but it's going to last a lot longer than row cover. It doesn't go in holes so easily. It drapes really nicely, like over hoops and stuff. It's not one of those stiff kind of mesh things, so it's easy to keep it battened down on the ground to keep things out, and it lets the air through nicely compared to row cover. That's the Poly Pro kind of stuff.
Remake. Do you use Remake?
Remake is the polyester.
That's the sponge polyester.
Yeah, polyester. We use the other kind, the Poly Pro kind. It seems, in my experience, to last longer than the Remake itself. Yeah, but the Protect Net, It also lets the water through nicely, but a really nice thing about it for growing in the summer is that you can see through it. And so when you're watering, you can see if you've actually got the crop that you're trying to grow or if you've just got loads of weeds under there. And I, in the past, made the mistake of watering what I thought was our brassica seed beds, and it was loads of Galinsoga under there, and not many broccoli plants at all. So it's really nice stuff, and it's worth the investment. But do make sure you